Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us for the next episode of Getting to Know the Speaker for Flow Factor Conference 2019. Today, I'm joined by Oscar from CloudBees, and he has got a super exciting talk coming up for you next month. Really excited to dive into the details and get to know Oscar a little bit and find out more about Jenkins X, Tecton pipelines, and all the stuff happening in Kubernetes. Hi, Oscar. Thanks for joining us today.
Hey, Chris. Thanks for having me.
Awesome. Well, I'm glad you could make it. All right. Well, to get started, why don't you introduce yourself and tell us just a little bit about you, so we know a little more about who you are.
Of course. Yeah. So I think I'll try to keep it short, of course. But my tech experience dates back to the .com boom era back in the late 90s. I worked for a couple of startups. One of them in security and the other one in consumer credit reporting, very much like Credit Karma today. I did a lot of what they called web development or a webmaster role before. Delved into development in Java and used Unix and all that stuff. So it was all great. Then got recruited by Microsoft years later and started working on multiple technologies with Microsoft to help enterprise environments learn about cloud environments and integration, security, all that great stuff. And later became independent for a few years, spent time doing the same thing I was doing at Microsoft, but then got into open source and really shifted gears into modern frameworks, stacks and whatnot, and multi-cloud deployments, not just Azure, but AWS, Heroku, other clouds that are predominant in the industry. And that is, to a point, that's where I thought, it'd be great to be part of a team again. And that is when I joined CloudBees not too long ago. And so here I am.
Okay, awesome. That's a great intro. And so tell us a little bit about the role that you're in today and what it is that you're doing at CloudBees. Because from what we talked about before, this sounds like we got some exciting stuff going on.
Absolutely. So I joined CloudBees as a developer relations or developer advocate. And to me, there is a little bit of confusion in the industry as to what encompasses that. But to me, it's very clear. First and foremost, it is to champion for our end users, the users of the product, in this case, developers, and sometimes ops people that use Jenkins X. I advocate for the use of what they're trying to achieve, whether it be getting started, maybe some complex configuration, a deployment in a cloud that we don't support, bringing issues and successes, and funneling that information to internal folks so that we can improve the product in the end.
Okay, awesome. And so right now, over the last few months, CloudBees, specifically Jenkins, has been actively involved in the Kubernetes space, specifically on the CD Foundation. Can you tell us a little bit about that, about the CD Foundation, what that is and what's happening over there?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, this actually happened right before I joined, is when the announcement came out, and the whole team was in Spain when this happened or was announced. And I was actually quite pleased to hear that. The reason is that many other projects of this caliber are incubated by this foundation, right? So we talk about Spinnaker. We have other projects like Tecton, which, by the way, we now integrate into our serverless topology in Jenkins X. So for me, it was pretty exciting, and hence why this topic that I want to cover in Flow Factor is showing users how to leverage Tecton pipelines, how to modify them, and really get to know how to use that within the whole CI/CD pipelines that we have in Jenkins X.
Okay, so hopefully this doesn't steal a little bit of what you're going to talk about shortly, but when I first heard about the CD Foundation, and of course we've all known about Jenkins, I've known Kosuke since it was Hudson, and right. He's been to Utah a few times to talk at the Utah Java User Group, and so he's a friend of the area. And then James Strachan, people may know from Groovy, started Jenkins X, I think maybe last year.
That's right. About a
Exciting.
year and a half now. Yeah.
Yeah. Exciting new project taking these, sort of the CI/CD space into a different realm. And all of us that have followed Netflix have heard of Spinnaker, right? We all know, okay, that's a CD pipeline. It was, some of the things that Sam Newman talked about in his Building Microservices book. So that's all those three things, I think, exciting
Right.
new stuff. But the one that I did not know anything about, and I still feel is a little bit, I don't understand, is Tecton. And when you go to the CD Foundation, I'm looking at it right now, it goes to a Git repo, and that's about it. So tell me a little bit about Tecton and what's going on in that space.
Yes, of course. So Tecton is an open source project, as you already know. It's led by a great person who I admire over at Google, Christy, and her team. And they've done a lot of work, right? And it's still being evolved. It's beta. There's a lot of stuff to be worked on. And I'm part of that group that joined it to be able to stay informed as it relates to our initiative with Jenkins X as we integrate it. But because it's very new, there is a lot of stuff that we are collaborating on with them as well, right? And so, several folks at CloudBees are integrated into that, forum to be able to provide feedback and make sure that that type integration with Jenkins X is proper. And so this is also why you will go into the Jenkins X site and not see a lot of documentation around Tecton pipelines and how to use them. Because all of this happened just recently. In fact, as I was mentioning earlier, there was a major commit in our Jenkins X repo that allows to use Tecton pipelines and override them in stages or steps. And none of this is well known. Of course, I monitor the Kubernetes Slack channels we have, but everyone's asking. So I wish I had other folks helping me internally right now, but right now I'm putting together a lot of that documentation as well as video tutorials to show folks how to get started with Tecton pipelines in Jenkins X.
Okay, awesome. And since we're talking about the CD Foundation and CloudBees involvement, just so folks understand, all the stuff we're talking about is free, open source. CloudBees is a major contributor to this and actively involved, but anybody can really use this software, right?
That is correct. That is correct. You don't have to pay a dime. Maybe the usage of a cloud, if you're using Google Cloud or AWS, which we support as well as Azure, but certainly not a charge in terms of using the product. There is no licensing fees. Everything is free.
Okay, awesome. And so before we jump into your talk, and maybe this sort of ties into that a little bit, but if I'm working and I hear this talk and I'm like, okay, Jenkins X sounds pretty cool. I'd like to give this a whirl. Do you have any sort of pointers or anything you might say to somebody, this is a good way to get started with Jenkins X? I know I started playing around with Jenkins X last year, but I'd like to hear your thoughts.
Yes. So one of the things that happened when I first started with CloudBees is that I myself wanted to get started with Jenkins X, and I found there were some things that needed to be highlighted in our documentation side and whatnot. And so I've been working slowly towards making that happen. But a piece of advice for anyone trying to get started right now is definitely use a cloud, whether it's GKE is one of our more mature and supported clouds at the moment. Secondary to that is AWS, and then third, Azure. People try to use Minikube, and I certainly did when I started, but there are some drawbacks to that, right? There is no static IP address for the webhooks to work in GitHub, and some other things there involve Prow and Tide do not support GitLab if you're trying to use anything other than GitHub. So those are a couple of pointers that I can give you now so that you don't have that pitfall as I did.
Awesome. Okay. And I will add to that, having worked in a few different Kubernetes installations at companies, there used to be the notion that you can't sort of roll your own Kubernetes environment, that you could, it's just going to be very expensive. And of course, we have the managed platforms today. But the one thing I liked about Jenkins X is I really could stand up a cluster and have all the things that I need, including, I was doing it in AWS, a master and worker nodes. It kind of gave you a suggested default setting for your Kubernetes environment and for Jenkins X. So I felt like it's actually a very nice sort of tool to give you management of your Kubernetes space.
Absolutely. And so you can stand up a cluster with a single command, right? And it will be in minutes. However, another thing that I found out is that many companies, and this all coming from my background in practicing DevOps, is that infrastructure as code is always part of that, right? And so a lot of folks in the community are asking, well, I don't want the JX CLI to generate or create or provision my Kubernetes cluster. What do you have anything that can help me do infrastructure as code? So in fact, we do have that. You can separately create your cluster using Terraform, version that, and then install Jenkins X on top of that cluster, right? There are a few housekeeping things you may have to do, such as configure RBAC and a few others, but in the end, you can provision them. Provision your cluster first via infrastructure as code, and then use Jenkins X install command to install Jenkins X on it. So definitely that is a use case that we support.
Awesome. Well, and that feels like a great segue to what you're going to be talking about at Flow Factor Conference this year. So why don't you just give the title of your talk, and then just a little preview for people so they have an idea of what it is that you're going to be talking about. And we have your speaker bio and the session already up on the Flow Factor site, so that's also helpful. But go ahead.
Yeah, I think I was playing around with the title of the talk myself, but in the end, it will be something like getting started with Tecton pipelines in Jenkins X. It is an introductory, hands-on presentation, so you will see a lot of stuff in action in real time. But it's going to be a getting started approach where later on we might dive deeper into it via either a workshop or other video tutorials that I will author at a later date.
Okay, awesome. Yeah, and for those watching this that have known me over the years when I was running UJUG, one of the things that's really important to me is every person that does a presentation at Flow Factor leave the participants with something they can use tomorrow morning at the office. So if, in this case, open source of freely available tools, you could sit down at your desk Wednesday morning and just run some commands, and you could actually see exactly what, Oscar was showing you. Did that kind of line up with sort of your objective as well for the attendees?
Oh, absolutely. Right. So in fact, I will be using a version that's available for people to install on their laptop. While I'm talking about it, if they choose to execute the same commands, it is fine. It will, it should work. There's a lot of things at stake here. There's a lot of updates to the product. So I'm using a specific version. If folks choose to do that, say the next day, as long as they use the same version that I am using, I think it's a safe path, right? So definitely they will have the opportunity to do exactly what I'm doing on their own laptop. Okay,
awesome. All right, well, thank you for taking us through a tour of what you're going to be talking about and your progression to eventually end up at CloudBees. I'm super excited about seeing your session. I've done a little work with Jenkins X late last year. Really liked it, as I was saying, and I think it's a bright, shining future for what's happening in the Jenkins ecosystem.
Yeah. So it's got a lot of great momentum. I'm excited. So I thank you for allowing me to talk about what I'm passionate about right now.
Very welcome. And with that, for those of you that have been to all of our sessions so far, know we have a little Easter egg, a question that each speaker has put together that if you approach them and say, hey, Oscar, how you doing? And then ask this question, he'll know that you got to this part of our interview. So Oscar, what was your question?
Well, that's a good question. I haven't thought about it, but if you ask me, how can I quickly get started with Jenkins X, I might actually have a single command that you can put in your terminal and it provisions everything, and you're ready to go. So
that is awesome. Jez Humble talks a lot in his presentations about continuous delivery and, microservice architecture, that you really want to get things down to just a command to really get someone bootstrapped. And so it's awesome to see that you guys are doing that.
Yes, we're very adamant of making it easy for folks, and including folks that are not familiar with Kubernetes, right? So the whole point is to extract you in a way from the complexities of that orchestration platform and focus more on building features for your application and not even worry about the intricacies of putting it through CI/CD, right? There's a lot of automation that has gone already developed on top of Jenkins X, so that you don't have to worry about creating Helm charts for your app or hooks or anything like that. All that repeatable, monotonous stuff is you're abstracted from. All you worry about is actually writing code for your application, pull requests as per the developer workflow, which is very common, and there you're off. So yeah, that's our goal, simplicity.
Okay, awesome. Well, thank you so much for being here today. Excited to see you in less than 4 weeks, and can't wait to get Flow Factor kicked off.
Likewise. Thanks for having me today, and enjoy the rest of the day.